here we go.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and for doing this presentation for us. We're really thankful and super excited to learn what you have to share with us today. So,
Yay. I mean, I honestly I'm super chill. I'm just really always excited to be able to connect with George Wiley folks.
mhm.
I have so much love and respect for the organization. Anytime that I can connect, it's really just an honor and a privilege.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. But yeah, so I'll go ahead and just like do a little introduction. There we go. Um, so Dr. Hernandez is an associate professor of sociomedical sciences at Columbia University's Mailman School of Public Health and the director of the Community Engagement Core of the NIEHS-funded Center for Environmental Health and Justice in Northern Manhattan. And she conducts research at the intersection of energy, equity, housing, and health. And I don't want to take up too much of your time and space, so then I'll hand it over to you. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Excellent. Like I said, Claire, thank you so much. And thank you all for attending. I wanna so today my goal is really to talk about energy justice in relation to other forms of justice, ways of also thinking about the problem and the complexity of the problems at hand, as well as the solutions that get us there. And in the meantime, thinking about this as a human-centered problem. A lot of times energy and energy justice is like kind of thought about as a technical issue. It's the technology that's the problem. Well, that's not exactly the case. If you think about the disproportionate impact of who is experiencing problems with energy and who might be left behind as we are embarking on this very necessary energy transition. And for me, that really kind of situates people as experts and as the focal point of energy justice. So with that, I will start to share my screen. Here we go. All right. So I promised I was hoping that this would be interactive. And so if you have any questions whatsoever, please do not hesitate. You could stop me. Claire, I just might need your help. If indeed someone actually needs wants to kind of share something.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
so like I said, I'm going to be talking about environmental, climate, and energy justice and how they converge at home for people and for the planet. And I'm so happy to see other people locking into to the presentation. So environmental justice, climate justice, and energy justice very much are interconnected. The gaze and the focus of climate justice initiatives is global. It's really thinking about our world, how our earth is changing. I was recently in the Arctic, and the way that climate change was explained from the increasing temperature perspective is that our earth is reaching a point of fever. And if you think about it, like our personal temperatures, if we if our temperature was elevated by a degree or two, we would be hot and in fever zone and mode, right? So if we went from 98 degrees to 99 or 100, we would be hot and in fever. And then if we went up to 103 degrees, we could risk death, right? And our Earth is at 1.5 degrees Celsius, not too far off from that experience of basically being in fever mode. So when we think about climate justice, it's really about justice to our planet and supporting planetary health. So a focus on the globe. Yay, thank you, Sam. I hope that, yeah, I thought it was really great too. All right, so when we think about energy justice, what we're thinking about is a focal point on, at least the way that I think about it, is on the household and on or the built environment, we could call it, and on the ways in which energy transforms into productive uses, right? So energy allows us to do so many things, including beyond this conference on this Zoom call today. But I think very importantly, it's the energy systems that we want to focus on from a justice perspective, as well as its impacts on households. And then when we think about environmental justice, the focal point is on communities. When the disadvantages are concentrated and the burdens are concentrated, but the benefits are concentrated elsewhere, it's the tension and that disparity that we're trying to address and reverse and close those gaps. And therefore, it really is a more place-based component. And the focus is often on the disproportionately impacted populations. And so that's kind of laid out here in more of a text form. But I think when I think about these issues, I also think about, well, what gets us, what are the levers that have helped us make progress when it comes to advancing environmental justice? And there it's been advocacy. Advocacy has been a critical tool in identifying that there were injustices and also working toward their correction. For climate justice, I think it's actually been research. Research has been an important tool by which to understand the issues, the gravity of the problem, the urgency to act. And it's also like kind of motivated people in a slightly different way that is more in the headspace. And then there's energy justice, which in some ways has been very legalistic in its goals, right? It's been matter of fact, like, this is a procedural justice problem. There's some regulatory process going on, some decision making around energy energy projects or what have you. And we need to insert ourselves in understanding that this is not producing the outcomes that we want. Therefore, we have the distributional problems. And it's the recognition of, people that are disproportionately impacted that gets us. But really the focus here is just legal. Now, when I think about what achieving big justice is about, it's probably bringing all of those things together, right? It's bringing in the advocacy, it's bringing in the research, and it's bringing in the legal procedures that really get us to change, right? It's what helps us to close the gaps because we kind of need a little bit of everything to make a difference. We have to appeal to people's hearts, we have to appeal to their heads, and we have to appeal to their hands, right? So we have to give people something to do. And if like there's a saying where like, if you can't, do one thing, then you do something else, then you do something else, you just, like wherever you can act, you should act. But it's an ecosystem of justice. There's an ecosystem of injustices, and a lot of times there's overlap in the communities that are impacted, but definitely there's also an ecosystem of what gets us to a point of justice. All right, so I know that this is supposed to be an orientation to energy justice. And I like to think that climate, energy, and environmental justice, but particularly housing, are kind of linked and interconnected pathways, right? So like, I think of homes as being a critical vector for understanding energy issues. They're also a really critical vector for understanding scaled problems at the community level, which is what gets us to the environmental justice problems, but also thinking about who's at the front line of climate justice as it's changing. And how do we understand who's contributing most to the climate problem? And in that way, then we're also thinking about the communities that have small carbon footprints, but are often on the front lines of climate change. And then the inverse, people like homes and communities that have big carbon footprints, but their privileges shield them from being on the front line. But when we think about this kind of interconnection, I like to not only think about problems and framing problems, but also like what gets us to close those gaps. So energy efficiency and housing reduces consumption and emissions, impacting climate mitigation efforts. Inadequate housing conditions, especially in disadvantaged communities, lead to health disparities and environmental injustices, layering on the complexity of the issues. Climate change exacerbates housing instability, with displacement being a risk of climate change. Also kind of highlighting then the intersection between environmental and housing justice as well. Equitable housing policies such as affordable and sustainable housing can address simultaneously energy and environmental justice concerns. And sustainable housing practices enhance community resilience to climate impacts, and they also promote justice. And as I've written in the past, investing in people and populations is ultimately how you close justice gaps. And you can do that through energy efficiency, deep retrofits, grading environmental and energy issues. Like I said, I started on this path when I was exposed to the issues in people's homes. And to be honest, like, it is the thing that continues to always motivate me to like keep going, even when it's been hard, even when I'm tired, even when I've been hurt by people that quote unquote are about justice. It's been the people that I have sat with and learned from that always motivate me to do this work. I want to share some of the experiences that I have personally witnessed. And then we'll get into more of the science. But are you able to actually see?
God,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know how many times I've been in the hospital because of the heat, for one thing. But I have COPD and asthma. And those are bad things for people that have respiratory problems. It's the heat. God, we only know.
So that's one. I'm just gonna go through all of them so you can kind of like see some of these things. And you can also
It's ridiculous hot. And when I moved here, the neighbors, they said, Miss, don't call the manager number and tell them it's too hot in here. Let your windows open, turn on the air conditioner, and put the fan. Because if you do, they're gonna turn it off and we ain't gonna get enough. We're gonna wash the clothes and hang them up before you leave the dry. When it's hot, it's hot. How are you gonna cool off if you got all the windows open and the air conditioner and the fan? Because my God, it's hot in here.
This is actually the opposite problem of what we're experiencing with extreme heat. It's actually when buildings are overheated, which itself is like an inefficiency, right? Where like, you know, the last thing that you want is to be overheated in your home. And this is what she's talking about, is then not having any heat, because it's like either on or it's off. Now this next story is about the heat being off.
No one should have to risk health or fire safety to stay warm. Listen to how this New Yorker copes with unreliable heat in his apartment.
I open it and I turn it on like full, like 400, and I leave it open. And then I put hot water on the stove also. I put hot water in the pots because I have to use the same hot water to bathe also. But remember, it's freezing. So I have my big bucket under there. I use that to put hot water to bathe in the winter time when water is off. And then I have to bathe very conservatively. And it's inconvenient. You have to make the best out of it. Because there's no hot water coming up.
I'll share one more and then I kind of want to like open up some discussions.
Do you take your AC for granted? Listen to how this New Yorker dealt with asthma and heat-related illness without AC.
I also have chronic asthma. It's really, really hard for me to breathe. I start to shake and dizzy and nauseous. I do need AC. So everybody in this entire building have AC in the living room. I'm the only one who doesn't. I called 311. I requested, and they said that they're gonna have somebody call me back within 2 weeks. I was not called until a year later. A person from, believe it or not he, night shift called me. Who is the last one? You're the last one to get. Brand new. They put it in there. They set it up for me. It's the best gift I got.
Do you take your AC for granted?
So can we talk about those stories? Can we talk about like your reactions to what you all just saw?
I mean, I know for me personally, it very much reflects upon a lot of what I've seen and heard from people like coming in for the weekly meetings at the George Wiley Center. And I feel like it's really opened my mind to a whole like section of environmental injustices that I really hadn't even thought about before, like utilities being such an important part of just like living and proper living conditions. And it's like really horrible that something that seems so insignificant is actually really not at all.
Mhm. Yeah, that's so well said. It's invisible, right? If you think about it, you don't see energy, but you feel its absence, especially, right? And it's super clear when it's a threat. It's like one of those things that if you're like concerned about whether or not you're going to be shut off, it just weighs on you and it stays with you. So in that way, it's kind of very significant. Anybody else have a reaction? I am hoping that this is going to be interactive because
Yes.
is
I
oh
my name is Trenda.
hi Brenda.
Hi, Rhode Island, native Rhode Islander, and I could relate to the woman that was speaking, and she was in so much heat, and she has asthma, and she was just in a lot of heat and having a problem breathing. I know I've been displaced now for 18 months. I'll get into that too. And it was environmental, so that's why this is particularly interesting to me to be able to talk to environmental experts. I can relate to that. I ended up they made it somewhat mandatory that we get ACs. I was on the third floor for 5 years without an AC, and then it got so hot that last summer that I was there a couple summers ago, and it was so hot, and I said, "Oh my God, I gotta get an AC." But so a room AC, is a little cheaper, but they said that we needed a bigger, that they could catch fire or something. Now, mind you, everybody's had these ACs for 30 years. People have had ACs in there. I lived there 30 years, and for 30 years, different people have had ACs. I had only had my AC the last summer that I was there because I didn't have an AC for like about a decade. But anyway, but it got so hot where I was on the third floor, and I ended up getting one. But so I wanted to get a room air conditioner, but they wanted me to, they wanted us to get these expensive air conditioners. And I'm like, mind you, they're not helping. I was in subsidized housing, but in Kent County. So, but what ended up happening, I ended up getting that AC, and then also then within say by December, whatever. Anyways, I ended up, long story short, I ended up getting literally poisoned out of my place, literally, and I'm still displaced, literally still displaced from it. I never in my worst nightmare would know. I got black mold poison. I'm still trying to get help in Rhode Island with this. I got black mold poison, so I was like getting dizzy, nauseous, and everything. So it was privately tested, and it was found that that's what it had. And then they also told me that they see the black mold inside of me. Oh, that I had to be tested. Mind you, this is all privately done. They wouldn't have cared. They would have swept it under the rug if anything happened to me in my place. But anyways, I had the sense to get it. So I had to go from the Rhode Island Hospital ER to a hotel and pay almost $3,000 a month. Yeah, you heard me correctly. Literally, almost $3,000 a month. From paying 200 and something, subsidy, to like, I don't know how many times that is because, like I said, it was almost $3,000. So I ended up, and I can, can only spend that kind of money for so long, So like I said, I'm just still displaced now because, well, the backdrop to it was, I don't want to get into the backdrop racism, but I'll leave that alone because I'm trying to just get into the environmental part. So yeah, I have the records and everything of the black mold and how many species of black mold was in there. Well, the worst part is that they wouldn't literally, this is a nightmare. They wouldn't come. So even with a housing attorney, the housing attorney wasn't there to help me with that. He was there to help me facilitate my paperwork, but due to the backdrop of racism, but that's another story. I'm not trying to get into the racism part. I'm trying to get into the environmental part. They wouldn't even come in to do any type of mold remediation. They wouldn't do anything whatsoever, like nothing. Like I can't believe it. Like they wouldn't do anything to the point where they literally poisoned me out of my place. I lived in the complex for like 30 years. They literally poisoned me out. Like I'm displaced right now due to this month now is 18 months. 18 months that I've been displaced.
Look, your personal story is like all the things, right? I mean, it's poor
Yes.
housing conditions, and
Yes.
those poor housing conditions lead to bad health. And
Yes.
also the poor housing conditions force
Yes.
people to leave because you
Yes.
just can't take it anymore. And of course, you're pointing out that the root cause of all of this, right? It's not just that only that relationship exists, but if you look further upstream, then you're gonna find that these things are patterned and that race is a central issue when it comes to environmental injustices, when it comes to housing problems, when it comes to energy issues, all of that is very much true.
Yes, I gotta find places to be in the daytime. I'm literally senior and I've been displaced, and I can't even explain how much money it costs to eat out every day, how much, I mean, I can't even explain to you what it's like,
Yeah,
if you want to buy water would cost you $3 for maybe 3, 4, 5 to $6 for water, for 24 pack, but you have to have a place to put water, so it's gonna cost you $1 a bottle. That's a cheap bottle. $1 bottle at 24 bottles means a 24 pack is costing you $24. That's a cheap bottle of water. If you get a $2 bottle of water, now that 24 pack is what to $48. 24 pack bottle pack of water. So it's very expensive to be
it
displaced.
adds up. No,
Very expensive.
definitely.
The hotel costs me thousands of dollars.
They say it's expensive to be poor, it's just one of these things where it's so cyclical and it's so,
Now,
I'm
yes,
gonna
the
keep
main
going because what I want to do is I want to be able to give some language to some of the issues and to really show the trends and how your experience is actually very similar to other people's experiences. So, I know Camilo knows this, but a big part of my career has been in defining what energy insecurity is. So it's like food insecurity is a kind of a well-established concept, but we haven't really thought about other issues in the same ways. But I've been working on defining and operationalizing energy insecurity, which is defined as the inability to meet household energy needs. And it has a housing dimension, which is like the physical part. It has a financial dimension, which is the economic part. And it has all the different things that people do to get by. If it's balancing their budgets, or if it's turning their stove on for heat, or like the gentleman that did all the different things to warm up the water so he had hot water and heat in the context of that not being provided by the landlord. We did this survey with the Department of Health in New York City, and we started to kind of like identify the actual indicators. This is a big concept. A lot of my work has been rooted in like interviews, so telling people stories and that kind of thing. But if we wanted to actually get some numbers to the issues, we would need to be able to like identify what the indicators are. So the home is too hot, the home is too cold, difficulty paying the bill, utility debt in excess of $100, a disconnection notice, a shut off, not using your air conditioner because of the heat, because of the run costs, like what it would cost to like use it, not using your heat because of the run cost, using a stove or oven for heat, or reducing your energy use because of the cost. And what we did is we mapped this and we asked over 2,000 New Yorkers. It was what they call a representative sample. So they were enough to say, we, like do some statistical weighting. That one response is like everybody else, it kind of is weighted to other people in New York City. So what we found is that almost 40% of New York City residents are reducing their energy consumption to save on their bills. Almost over 20% of New Yorkers are using their stove for heat. Almost 30% of New Yorkers report their homes being too hot. But that could be in the summer and the winter time, right? So, because there's a lot of overheating that happens in New York City. And about 27% of New York City residents report their homes being too cold. Some portion, over 20%, describe having difficulty paying, followed by utility debt, disconnection notices, and then disconnections. But disconnections only affect 3% of the population. So let's say in the broad scheme of things, only a small population of people are impacted, but that doesn't mean that the impact is unimportant. It just means that when we think about it at the population scale, it's not as much as some of these other indicators that impact people. And the same thing, like not running your heat, it's kind of normalized to have heat, but it is more common not to have AC and not to use your AC because of costs. So this is like different ways of trying to like quantify the problem of energy insecurity here in New York City. And what we ultimately decided to do was not to look at any one of those indicators, but to see if households experience 3 or more of those indicators. And when they said yes to that, what we did was we said this household is energy insecure because they're not just reducing their energy costs to save, they're also doing that plus either experiencing a home that's too hot or having difficulty paying. That combination of things is important to be able to say, this person is experiencing multiple issues all at once. And what we found is 28% of New Yorkers are dealing with 3 or more indicators of energy insecurity. The majority of them are Black and Latino residents compared to whites, renters rather than owners, recent immigrants, and people living in the US for not as long, and households with children. And so these are what we call populations that have vulnerabilities. It's not that they are themselves vulnerable and unable or, somehow deficient, but because of structural racism and other issues like the owners and the property managers not fixing things and not providing enough heat and that kind of thing, then these are groups that are disproportionately impacted by energy insecurity. Another piece to this is that we know that these folks are also experiencing worse health, and that takes on different forms. So we know that they have higher odds of experiencing mental health conditions, cardiovascular disease, as well as respiratory conditions like asthma. But many are also themselves using electric medical devices. So that's sleep apnea machines, nebulizers that people use for asthma, breast pumps, any number of electric medical devices, so that people are that are health, what we call medically vulnerable. And I know George Wiley has been, like kind of pushing for this, but this is the evidence that medically vulnerable populations are actually more affected by energy insecurity than other groups. And there are reasons for that. Maybe it's because people are unable to work because of their medical conditions, and or they have other needs that drive up the electricity cost, and utility costs overall. But it is something that we are, like, this is one of the first studies that really shows this correlation in health health conditions affecting the experience of energy insecurity. I'm gonna share some more videos now, and those videos are really gonna be about other issues that people are experiencing that are also energy justice related. And the first one is about debt. So let me
Do you have issues paying off your utility bills? Well, you're definitely not alone. In our studies, we discovered that 14% of New Yorkers experience an energy debt that's at least $100. Let's hear what this Bronx resident has to say about utility debt.
Well, I've been here for 6-7 years now. Since I've been here, I've had 3 surgeries, so I'm kind of like stuck here. My bill is like $300 a month. I get a little discount because I'm disabled. They only give you $500, like, well, $400 for the whole, but
The whole year.
yeah, that only covers 1 month.
How behind are you on the bill?
I'm on the end that right now, so.
This past January, New York Governor Kathy Hochul announced a debt forgiveness program that will provide financial relief for those who are experiencing energy debt. This is one small step needed to tackle the systemic issue of energy insecurity. To learn more about energy insecurity, make sure to check out our newest paper in the Health Affairs Journal, and make sure to follow our socials at Hot and Cold NYC.
Where do you go to charge your devices?
What was the seat? Everybody gave me something. Put the wires together and set it up so I could join my chair and move around. Oh, why don't we get plugged in? I can't move around. In the winter, and very cold out in the winter, and I can sit out here because I don't have a home, right? I don't have a home anything. There's no one else. I mean, deal. What would you choose?
It has this thing where you can like sign up for renewable energy, right? But it's like a lot more expensive than use. So I would really like to sign up for it, but like, I don't want to pay that much.
I'd install a wind turbine, just to try to generate a little bit more cleaner energy, also like solar energy.
Definitely the solar panels. I would definitely look to invest in that.
So basically, these videos are about people experiencing, like, wanting access to clean energy, being interested in it, but it feeling so far away as like an option that they're actually not able to connect to clean energy. So there's all these advances happening, but there are still a lot of barriers to people actually accessing it. So a dimension of energy justice is a few things. So one is definitely getting people connected to the clean energy resources that are available, lowering the bar, making it easier for low-income populations and populations that have been historically marginalized and disadvantaged to have access to those resources and not to half-ass it, meaning that there's some things that are available now, but your income still has to be high enough to qualify for a loan on the other side because the rebate only covers some portion of it, or, you know, and it's attached to your taxes. Well, a lot of people need the help kind of more immediately, and they can't wait until next tax season to get the write-off. So we have to figure out other pathways of closing the gap to clean energy. Also debt and disconnections and the risk around housing, like the woman said on the video. I'm not just behind on my utility bill, I'm also behind on my rent. And so people are having layered hardship. It isn't just one thing, it's that they have kind of multiple issues. So we have to figure out stronger, more robust safety nets. And then the homelessness situation and people that are unhoused and also still have energy needs. The young man that basically had an electric medical device, but living on the streets, didn't have a safe way to plug in. So he plugged into the light post, and that has all kinds of safety and health risks associated with it. And yet it was the only place where he can actually meet that need. So we need to be thinking about robustly when we are aiming for energy justice. How do we think about this? What are the pathways? What can we do in the interim? As in, like, more like immediately, what do we have to do and set people up for the long term? But that discussion and that decision making and those goals and those ambitions, we kind of have to lay them out and ask for more in different ways and at different times. So I wanted to, we don't have a lot of time. Um, I wanted to end with, I was going to talk about air conditioning, and obviously air conditioning is an issue. We know that the woman that you saw that she got the AC and she's like, that was the best gift ever. We actually evaluated that program because that was like a major air conditioning distribution program that happened during COVID. And it was an excellent initiative. But in many ways it fell short because equipping homes with the mechanical technological units and fixes doesn't often alleviate the fullness of the burdens. And when I say that, I'm talking about the cost to run your air conditioning unit if you have it, the cost to run your heating, live with light, like so many different dimensions. And so we definitely have to have complementary financial supports that complement the physical aspect. So I just want to lay out what I think are important paths forward on the policy side that would help us to like enact justice. Let me just say that my vision of justice is not a set of principles or a thought exercise. It's actually a set of practices. And that practice that is basically exercised as often as possible, every day, in every way. We can't achieve justice if we're mistreating people. We can't achieve justice if we're ignoring people. We can't achieve justice if we're not valuing people. And I think that those aspects of justice sometimes get lost when people are so ambitious in thinking about the principles of justice, but not invested in the practice of it. And so I want to just talk about what are some real practical ways of thinking about how do we achieve justice. The goalposts on this are not always like immediate, sometimes they're longer term. And this says in New York City because I did recycle these slides, sorry. But it's in general, pathways to addressing energy insecurity, and by doing that, getting closer to alleviating injustice and difficulties and meeting energy needs. So, all right, so where are we here? No, I don't want to do that. I want to make this my focal point. Okay. So LIHEAP redesign. So the low income home energy assistance program is the primary way that people are able to access energy assistance in the US. It is usually a seasonal benefit. The offices are often open only when you have to turn your heat on. And for the most part, because of how it's distributed and many people that are eligible don't actually get the support that they need, something on the order of about 16% of all eligible households nationwide that would otherwise financially qualify for LIHEAP are actually getting that assistance. And so there are real gaps in how the program is designed and its reach. There's very limited cooling assistance. So we have climate change. Climate change is raising the temperature, making it more necessary to adapt through cooling. And yet the way that our main energy assistance program works is really not about having cooling. And there's also restrictions. In New York City, for instance, you have to pay for your own heat in order to qualify for the localized version of LIHEAP. So, and those restrictions exist in different ways because the states have their own ways of designing the programs. And so while there are some kind of federal guidelines, for the most part, there's a lot of latitude at the state level too. So working with the Rhode Island, like authorities around LIHEAP and redesigning LIHEAP for the purposes of what would make sense locally on Rhode Island is one way of dealing with this. Debt and disconnections. We have, very little in the way of protecting certain populations, medically vulnerable populations, populations like children, pregnant people, people that use electric medical devices. These are expanding disconnections can be very helpful. And disconnection protections, I should say. And ensuring that more people are not facing that particular risk, but also debt. We know that that's a pathway to disconnections. So we have to kind of undo those pieces by trying to focus on energy affordability. Thinking about buildings and clean energy, I've talked about that. Energy efficiency, equipping buildings with solar and battery storage, and other, ways in which they could be, running not only more efficiently, but also more resiliently and prepared for the energy transition that's happening. Thinking about equitable utility rate structures, percent of income payment plans. I know you all in Rhode Island have been looking at that. Minimum access to kilowatts, lifeline tariffs, other issues. And then also maximum and minimum temperature guidelines for indoor temperatures, plus bill assistance, thinking about no heat complaints and enforcement. Chandra talked about calling the authorities around enforcing the housing code, which is that, in most places, a home has to be habitable and not present with undue health risks like black mold or extreme temperatures. So really thinking about how do we do enforcement and engagement to support people as they are experiencing not just energy issues, but also housing issues, affordability issues, conditions, etc. So we don't have a lot of time. I know Sam is writing, how do we effectively push for these policy changes if the energy lobbyists are so incredibly powerful? Well, that's true. And I think efforts like the George Wiley kind of advocacy approach, which is getting people in front of elected officials, getting media attention, writing op-eds, kind of being visible. Well, one of the things that I always say about energy issues is that because they happen in the privacy of people's homes, it's not as public of a problem as other issues like street homelessness, for instance. But the more visible a problem is, the more people actually have to kind of deal with it. And so my answer to your question, Sam, I know it's not simple and it takes a lot of time and effort, and it sometimes could be exhausting, and it feels like, what's the point? Like, where we don't have as much power as other people that are, or money or influence or whatever. But I think staying in the fight, the commitment to this, bringing more and more people to this by recognizing, I mean, that's been a big part of my own approach, is we got to name the problem and we have to help people relate to it and understand that they're not alone in this problem, that this issue is much bigger than any one individual. And so, those are like core organizing and activism strategies that I think are still very applicable to this space, and where more and more pressure needs to be applied. And I don't know how much our social media campaign is reaching big decision makers, but we've garnered a lot of attention just from regular people that write in the comments that they experience these issues, that they know what it feels like. So I feel like as much as you can to, kind of make those connections, I feel like that's and it's not the only thing, but these are core things to do in trying to like make a change. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sam, for spreading the word, and Camilo. Honestly, it's always a pleasure for me to share what I know, and if I could be helpful in any way, if you ever need expert witness or whatever in the work that you all are doing, I'm on your side, and I would be honored to continue to collaborate.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us today. We really, really appreciate it. I know I learned a lot from that presentation. It's especially helpful because I'm an environmental science concentrator at Brown. So that was really cool to learn about. So thank you.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. Well, keep it going. And, I think we all have to find inspiration and motivation, but also just be disciplined in this practice. Remember that justice is not just a set of principles, it's a practice that we have to kind of continue to sharpen every day and in every way. And so thank you so much for your time and attention.
Thank you again. And thank you to
All right.
everybody who attended today. Really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.